I always believed that if you raised a child with love, that love would come back to you. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not quickly, but eventually. I held on to that idea like it was a law written into the bones of the world. I was wrong. The day my own son laughed as he took my house, I realized something. Some people don't love you for who you are. They love you for what they want from you. Before we get into what he did, and how everything turned back on him, let me tell you how this story really begins. And if you've ever been pushed aside by someone you trusted, stay with me. This one's for you. My name is Daniel, and for most of my life, my son Ethan was the center of my world. I raised him alone after his mother passed. I worked long hours, missed sleep, missed birthdays, all to keep us afloat. And for years, I thought he understood that. But something changed when Ethan turned 25. He stopped calling unless he needed something. He stopped visiting unless I reminded him. And slowly, the warmth in his voice faded into something colder, something sharp. It started with little things. Jokes about my age, comments about how I walked slower, remarks about planning ahead for when I couldn't handle things anymore. I laughed them off, trying to keep the peace. But every time he spoke like that, I felt something inside me shrink. One evening, he came over unannounced. He stood in the doorway, eyes scanning the house like he was already measuring what he'd take. He said, "Dad, we need to talk about the deed." Just like that, no greeting, no warmth. I felt a weight settle in my chest. I told him the house was fine, that I wasn't going anywhere. But he looked at me like I was an inconvenience, like my life was an obstacle to whatever future he imagined. And in that moment, I felt something crack between us, something that had held for decades. If you've ever had someone you love look at you like you're disposable, you'll understand the silence I fell into that night. Ethan didn't let the conversation go. Over the next few weeks, he kept bringing it up, always with that same calm, rehearsed tone, like he was talking to a client, not his own father. He said he was just being practical. He said a man my age needed a plan. He said the house would be better managed in his hands. Every time he spoke, it felt less like concern and more like pressure. A slow, steady push meant to wear me down. One morning, he showed up with documents in a neat folder, thick papers, legal papers. He placed them on the kitchen table and said, "Dad, it's just a transfer of responsibility. You'd still live here. Nothing would change. But I've been around too long to fall for pretty sentences wrapped around sharp edges." I told him no. He didn't argue, didn't raise his voice. He just smiled, a tight, polite smile, the kind you give someone you've already decided doesn't matter anymore. He said, "You're being emotional. You don't understand how things work now." And something about the way he said now made my skin crawl, like the world had moved on and I was just a piece of furniture left behind. After that day, he pulled back even further. No calls, no visits, just silence, until the envelope arrived. It looked official, too official. My hands trembled a little as I opened it. Inside was a letter from his attorney stating that Ethan believed I was no longer capable of managing my affairs, that he was pursuing the legal right to take control of my estate for my own protection. Protection. That word burned. I sat in my living room, surrounded by memories I had built with my own hands, painted walls, patched floors, furniture I carried in piece by piece. And all I could think was, how did my son become someone who could do this? But here's the truth I need you to hear. Betrayal doesn't happen in one blow. It happens in quiet steps, in moments so small you don't notice the ground shifting beneath you, until you fall. Still, even then, even after the lawyer's letter, I didn't fight back. Not yet. A part of me kept hoping he'd stop, hoping he'd realize what he was doing. But hope is a fragile thing. It only takes one moment to break it. For me, that moment came 2 weeks later, when Ethan walked in with a locksmith behind him. No warning, no conversation, just cold purpose. He looked at me like I was a tenant who'd overstayed his welcome and said, "Dad, this is happening. You can't make decisions anymore." The locksmith didn't even look at me. He just nodded and got to work. My own son, changing the locks while I stood in the doorway. I felt the world tilt. I felt something inside me go quiet. Not broken, just quiet. I packed a bag, only what I could carry. He didn't help. He didn't even watch. He just said, "This is for the best," like he was reading from a script someone handed him. When I stepped outside, the air felt colder. Or maybe I just finally understood how alone I was. That night I sat in a cheap motel room with one lamp and one chair, staring at the wall. And something inside me shifted. A slow, steady heat rising through the quiet. Because Ethan didn't know one thing. The thing that would undo everything he'd just done. He didn't know the will he'd counted on, the document he believed gave him power, was never filed. And the only person who knew that was me. I didn't sleep that night, not because of fear, but because of clarity. A strange, steady calm settled over me as I sat in that motel room, watching the neon sign outside flicker through the curtains. It felt like the world had stopped moving just long enough for me to understand what had really happened. Ethan hadn't just taken my house. He'd taken the last piece of faith I had in him. And yet, he had no idea that his victory was built on sand. See, years ago, after his mother passed, I met with an attorney. I wanted to secure everything for Ethan just in case something ever happened to me. I drafted a will, signed it, sealed it. But the attorney gave me advice I never forgot. He said, "Daniel, a will only has power once it's filed and recognized by the court. If you ever change your mind, don't file it until you're absolutely certain." I wasn't certain back then, and life kept moving. The will stayed in a safe deposit box, locked away and unseen. Ethan had no clue it even existed, and he certainly didn't know it held no legal weight. The irony was painful. He'd built his whole betrayal on something he assumed I'd done, something he assumed he understood. But assumptions can be fatal. The next morning I took the bus to the attorney's office. Old building, wooden floors that creaked under your shoes. The receptionist recognized me from years ago. She blinked, surprised, and asked softly, "Mr. Hayes, are you all right?" I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. When my attorney, Mr. Lawson, walked into the waiting room and saw me standing there with a single duffel bag at my feet, he froze. "Daniel, what happened?" So I told him. Not everything, just enough. His expression shifted from shock to anger to something steely and focused. He said, "We can fix this, but you need to be ready. Because once we move forward, your son won't be able to hide from the consequences." I didn't speak right away. I kept staring at the framed certificates on the wall behind him. For years I thought protecting Ethan meant protecting him from the real world. From struggle. From responsibility. Maybe that was my mistake. Maybe I'd shielded him so much he forgot that choices have weight. Finally I said, "Do whatever needs to be done." He nodded once. "Then let's start." We went into his office. He shut the door, closed the blinds, and motioned for me to sit. He pulled out a legal pad, clicked his pen, and said, "Daniel, the will you drafted was never filed. That means legally, it doesn't exist. Your estate is still entirely under your control." Hearing him say it out loud sent a strange warmth through my chest. Relief, mixed with sorrow. He continued, "Your son filed a petition claiming you're incapable of managing your own affairs. To win that, he has to prove it with medical evidence. Does he have any?" "None," I said, "because it isn't true." "Good," he replied. "Then here's what we do. First, we file a formal challenge. That stops his petition in its tracks. Next, we file a protective order preventing him from making any changes to your property or finances." I swallowed. He already changed the locks. "That won't matter," he said. "Those actions will be reversed. The court takes elder exploitation very seriously." Elder exploitation. Hearing those words felt like a punch, not because they weren't true, but because they were. Then he looked directly at me and said something that stopped my breath. "Daniel, this might not just be a civil case. What your son did could qualify as criminal coercion and unlawful eviction." I stared at him. "You're saying Ethan could—" "Yes," he said gently. "He could face charges." I leaned back in my chair. For a moment, all I could hear was the faint hum of the old ceiling fan. I didn't want my son in jail. I didn't want his life destroyed. I just wanted my home back. I wanted him to understand the weight of what he'd done. Maybe consequences were the only language he had left. Mr. Lawson pushed a stack of forms toward me. "We'll file these today. But Daniel, once this process starts, you need to stay somewhere safe. Do you have any family you can stay with?" "No," I said quietly. "It's just me." He thought for a moment. Then he reached into his drawer and pulled out a business card. "There's a small rental property a client of mine owns. Good place, quiet, cheap. I'll call him. He'll take you in for a few weeks." For the first time since Ethan shut the door in my face, I felt something like hope. After leaving the office, I took a cab to the rental house. Small place, old paint, creaky porch. But it felt more like home than the motel. I dropped my bag on the floor, sat on the edge of the bed, and exhaled slowly. Then I pulled out my phone. There were no messages from Ethan. Not one, not even curiosity about where I was. The silence told me everything I needed to know. Over the next few days, the legal wheels started turning. Mr. Lawson kept me updated. Letters filed, notices sent, orders submitted. And with every step he took, Ethan's world began tightening around him, though he didn't know it yet. I spent those days sitting at the kitchen table of that little rental house, drinking instant coffee, staring at the old hardwood floors, thinking, remembering, trying to understand how a boy I once carried on my shoulders could grow into a man who'd watch me walk out of my home without blinking. But the longer I sat with that pain, the more something else grew inside me, something steadier, something stronger. Not anger, not revenge, just truth. Ethan needed to see the consequences of his choices, and I needed to stop excusing them. 3 days later, Mr. Lawson called. He didn't waste time. He said, "My Daniel, you got the notice." My heart thudded once, hard. How did he react? There was a pause, a heavy, meaningful pause. Mr. Lawson exhaled. He called my office screaming. He thought he already had control. He thought everything was done. You should have heard how fast his voice changed when he realized the will was never filed. I closed my eyes. For the first time in weeks, I breathed easier. The storm had begun, but it wasn't coming for me. It was coming for him. Ethan's arrogance was his undoing. He had walked into my home thinking victory was guaranteed, thinking I was too old, too weak, too done to fight back. And now, suddenly his world was unraveling, one legal notice at a time. I spent the next week watching him spiral from a safe distance. Mr. Lawson kept me updated. Every call, every frantic email, every message of disbelief Ethan sent to try and stall the proceedings. He had no idea the real power was never in his hands. It was mine, and I was just getting started. The first time Ethan came to the rental house, he tried to mask panic with bravado. He knocked on the door, arms crossed, head high, like he was still in control. I opened the door slowly, pretending to be the frail, confused father he wanted me to be. "Daniel," he said, voice dripping with false concern. I think we need to talk. Let's be reasonable." I smiled softly, letting the quiet sink in. "Reasonable?" I asked, stepping aside to let him in. "I think you've confused reasonable with convenient." He paused. That small crack in his composure, I savored it. He didn't respond. He didn't know what to say. His eyes darted around the modest living room of the rental house, noting the furniture, the quiet, the absence of his control. I just want what's best for you," he stammered. "I'm protecting you." I laughed quietly, low and measured. "Protecting me? By locking me out of my own home? By sending letters claiming I'm incapable? That's your idea of protection?" He shifted uncomfortably. I could feel the tension radiating off him, like heat from a fire that had started quietly and now threatened to consume him. He wanted to argue, wanted to control, but he couldn't. Not yet. Not when the law and truth had started to turn against him. I didn't think," he began, then faltered. He knew I was right. He knew the cracks in his carefully constructed plan were widening. He had assumed, arrogantly, that my will was filed, that my estate was at his mercy. That assumption was now his cage. Over the next few days, the court proceedings began. Letters of revocation, protective orders, and notices were filed. Each one was like a hammer striking the fragile structure of Ethan's confidence. He began calling Mr. Lawson directly, frantic and pleading. He demanded explanations, demanded reversals, demanded answers he had no right to. And through it all, I stayed calm. I kept to my routine. I drank coffee in the morning, read the paper, watched the sun hit the porch. I let the storm happen around him. let him run into walls he hadn't seen because he assumed the world was his. The final blow came when the court scheduled the first hearing. Ethan showed up, suit pressed, tie tight, but he was different. Tension lined his face, the kind that no amount of pretense can hide. He tried to argue competence, tried to show evidence that I was somehow incapable, but the judge, after reviewing the documentation, stopped him cold. This court recognizes the prior will drafted by Mr. Hayes as his sole estate planning document, the judge stated. While it was never filed officially, the court acknowledges Mr. Hayes's current capability to manage his affairs. Any attempts to override this will are hereby suspended pending further review. Ethan's face fell. The arrogance was gone, replaced by disbelief and panic. He tried to speak again, but the gavel struck once, twice, and silence reigned. I sat in the courtroom, calm and steady. Watching the son who had tried to erase me from my own life realize that he had miscalculated. Every smug expression, every cruel laugh, every plan he had made had been turned inside out. After the hearing, Mr. Lawson and I walked back to my temporary residence. "He's going to be relentless," Mr. Lawson said, adjusting his coat. "You need to be ready." I nodded. "I am. But I've learned something important. Power isn't loud. It isn't flashy. It doesn't come from threats. It comes from patience and knowing the truth." The next day, I received a text from Ethan. Short, terse, just 3 words. "We need to talk." I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence stretch. Let him feel the tension he had created. Then, later, I sent a single message back. "Come by after work. We will." When he arrived, I didn't rush to meet him at the door. I let him knock, let him wait. When I finally opened it, I didn't smile. I didn't scold. I just looked at him, calm, composed, and allowed the quiet to speak louder than any words I could use. He walked in, shoulders tight, eyes darting nervously around the room. "Dad, I just want to understand. I thought this was easier." I shook my head. "Ethan, what you thought doesn't matter. What matters is what is real. You assumed power without understanding responsibility. You thought betrayal would give you control. It didn't, and it never will." He sank into the chair across from me, pale, exhausted, and defeated. And in that moment I realized something. This was more than revenge. This was education. This was truth delivered in a way he couldn't ignore. Every action I had taken, every step I had planned, wasn't just to reclaim what was mine. It was to show him the consequences of his choices. He opened his mouth, started to speak, but I held up my hand. "Don't, just listen." And for the first time, Ethan listened, because the quietest voices are often the ones that demand the most attention. The final hearing was set on a crisp Thursday morning. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and old paper, a scent that somehow made the tension heavier. I arrived early, dressed simply, calm, carrying only a folder with the original will and supporting documentation. No theatrics, no threats, just the truth, finally laid bare. Ethan arrived shortly after, looking as though the weight of the past weeks had pressed him into someone smaller, someone unfamiliar. The arrogance I remembered was gone. In its place, a mixture of fear, frustration, and disbelief. The judge called the session to order. Mr. Lawson presented the case methodically, walking through the timeline, the drafting of the original will, my legal capacity, and the falseness of Ethan's claims. He didn't just speak for me. He spoke for the principle I had lived by my entire life. Truth matters, and betrayal carries consequences. When Ethan tried to interrupt, the judge silenced him immediately. "This court will not tolerate interruptions. Mr. Hayes, please continue." And so I did. I read aloud, quietly but firmly, the key clauses of the will, the parts Ethan had never seen, the parts that determined the rightful ownership of the house and my estate. Each word landed like a small but undeniable weight in the room. A reminder. Assumptions don't make truth, and cruelty doesn't create law. Ethan's hands shook. His gaze flicked nervously between the judge, Mr. Lawson, and me. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The truth was enough. It always is. The judge leaned back, reviewing the documents. After a long, deliberate pause, he spoke. "Mr. Hayes's will, while previously unfiled, is legitimate and reflective of his intentions. The actions taken by Mr. Ethan Hayes to assume control over his father's property are hereby reversed. Any changes made to the property, the locks, or finances are null and void. Mr. Daniel Hayes retains full control of his estate. I felt a quiet relief wash over me. Not triumph, not joy, relief. Justice had been served, and it had not required malice. Just patience, clarity, and the courage to let truth speak. Ethan slumped into his chair. For the first time, I saw him as he truly was. A young man who had believed entitlement gave him power, only to discover that responsibility and respect were far more formidable forces. There was shame in his eyes, but also, perhaps, the beginning of understanding. After the court adjourned, we walked out together. I didn't speak much at first. The courthouse steps felt heavier than usual, each one a reminder of the weeks of tension, betrayal, and quiet strategy that had brought us here. Ethan stayed silent, and I let him. He needed to sit with the weight of his actions. When we reached the car, I finally spoke. Ethan, you learned something important these past weeks. I hope you remember it. Power without respect, without understanding, is nothing. It destroys relationships before it builds anything else. He nodded slowly, voice barely above a whisper. I understand, Dad. I see that now. We drove home in silence. The house looked the same from the outside, but I saw it differently. Every door, every window, every wall held more than memories. They held lessons learned the hard way. I unlocked the front door, walked in, and inhaled the familiar scent of home. A home almost lost, reclaimed not with anger, but with patience and the truth. Later that evening, Ethan approached me. He didn't apologize fully. Words like that often come slowly. But he offered something better. A commitment to change, to understand, to respect, to rebuild trust. And I, older now, wiser and stronger from betrayal, nodded. It wasn't complete. It wouldn't be instant. But it was a start. And in my heart, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Peace. I want you to take this story with you. Betrayal can come from the closest people in your life. It can feel insurmountable. But truth, patience, and careful planning, those are forces no arrogance can overcome. Protect yourself, know your rights, and never underestimate the quiet power of preparation. If you've ever felt overlooked, taken advantage of, or betrayed, remember, the smallest, quietest moves often carry the greatest weight. And for those of you who want to see another story of family betrayal and justice served, stay tuned. Our next story will reveal a shocking secret sibling rivalry where trust was shattered, and revenge came from the least expected place. You don't want to miss it. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the world has a way of balancing the scales when you least expect it.